one of the things that I've really found trying to do this is just how hard it is to get information coherently disseminated through a team, and even honestly from one investigation to the next, and through that process. So when I approached this problem, my previous job, I set out looking for the exact opposite of Demisto. And I think it's kind of funny that I'm standing here talking about it today, because what I was looking for was a human-driven workflow platform, something that gave me a place to put my tickets, a place to track my intelligence, a place to correlate data from point A to point B, kind of really a combination of a request tracker and Maltego, if such a thing existed. Orchestration and automation was nowhere to be found on my requirements list. So it's actually kind of funny that when I was going through this, looking at different options, the best platform wound up being this. I don't really know how that happened, to be honest. But what I want to talk about is how I came to those requirements, how I think they help move knowledge management and how they enable CTI, and then ultimately it's how I came across doing that, and some takeaways that I think are really useful. So it would not be an InfoSec presentation without a pyramid. That's the third law of InfoSec presentations. So as I think about the hierarchy of managing knowledge, the hierarchy of presenting and tracking and correlating the different things that we need to know to do this. First and foremost, baseline of process. This is your work queue management, tickets, work assignments, all of that sort of stuff. But ultimately, that's what we're supposed to do. The things that we know we can get out of a book that we're supposed to do. And if anybody has worked in a SOC, what we're supposed to do pretty much goes out the window the first time we see a real incident. And so the more useful, more contextually relevant basis for effective security operations, as far as I'm concerned, isn't what we were supposed to do. It's what somebody did last week when they saw something pretty similar. So my source of truth may be a playbook, but my source of reality is what Ruth did last week when she saw an incident that looked pretty much the same as this. Because we don't update playbooks constantly. We don't update our wikis constantly even. The whole point of a continually fresh wiki is not realistic either. But what is continually fresh is the truth of how we're doing this day to day, how we're investigating, how we're pulling threads, how we're pivoting, what data we're pulling from point A to point B. That's the reality that's really useful. And then what I really want to be able to distill from that is the intelligence, the connections, the relationships between an incident that I'm looking at today, an investigation that we looked at 2 months ago, and leverage that relationships to really tell me what I should be caring about. Because most of those connections are predictive of some kind of future relevance. Now, if an incident today has some correlation to an incident from 2 months ago, it is a strong likelihood that there will be some relevance to a future incident. Realistically, that's the crux of CTI. So starting to think about those different pieces of the puzzle that I needed to bring together to do this. So I was starting at the time from zero. We had no CTI program. We had no incident response. We had no ticket. So I had, honestly, the luxury of a clean slate, which doesn't come along very often. But as I was thinking about that, I figured out these were the core pieces of that I wanted to bring together. Work queue and playbooks are, I think, pretty self-explanatory for the SOC. The analytical and evidentiary history is that truth that I found was the most important aspect of this, because for investigations that may end up in court or may have some implications like that, you need to have that trail of actions, investigative history. You need to be able to reliably document those steps. But that entire process is also really useful to inform the analysis. That's That's the part that I'm looking for as an analyst when I go to investigate something, is that history of all of the past. And to make that useful, search was for me huge. And I think this is one of those things that, that just is really fundamentally important, is having clean and easy, transparent search. And an artifact library. It goes to the point of evidentiary history, but as new approaches, as new capabilities roll our way as defenders, the artifact library becomes really important. It's like thinking of a malware family that one day I may have a detection on, and I can process it at the time of investigation. But if 3 months later I develop some ability to reverse that, having that artifact library is essential to me from an intelligence perspective, because if I have the ability to reverse it and I can go back through my artifact history and reverse it everywhere else I've ever seen it before, that adds new dimensionality into the data. It adds new capabilities, new ability for me to draw those references, and to improve my ability now to leverage my historical intelligence. That also ties into this intelligence piece of building those connections. And we have this, what I would say is an insane notion in security, that we have IPs, domains, hashes as indicators. And that's basically all anybody ever passes around when we talk about indicators. One of, I would say, the few things that Styx got right is the notion that indicators can be a lot more than that. We can have still atomic indicators like a phone number, but also an indicator can be compound. It can be the presence of one string found within the context of something else. And that's not something that can be trivially represented. So we distill that generally into like signatures or rules or things like that become concrete representations of these patterns. But that is the crux of an intelligence object to be able to track also. So as I was building this, I wanted a way to track and correlate based not just on my IPs and domains, but also on the presence of these more complex, more compound indicators. And that also ties back into that artifact library, because that abstract representation has to be derived somehow to be represented. That's why that ability to continually refresh intelligence, continually refresh old incidents based on new abilities is so important to knowledge management and so important to using knowledge management to drive intelligence. And the relationships between all of these compound indicator objects, compound intelligence objects or complex intelligence objects aren't one-to-one. We have generally accepted, one event has n indicators. But those indicators have compound relationships too, and we lose those constantly. Like an IP address that is found in the header of an email delivering spam, delivering malware, is very different than the IP that we get by resolving a C2 domain that was reversed out of a particular family of malware that was derived from an email. Like that complex tree, that graph, becomes really important as we try to pivot and we try to build and understand and derive these relationships and then use them to predict how we can best align countermeasures in the future. Yes, I'm a blue teamer, I'm not an intel guy. So what I want to do is I want to use this intelligence to build better defenses for my network. And the only way I can do that is if I have confidence that what I'm doing, the countermeasures I'm tasking, are appropriate for the threat activity that I'm seeing. So in trying to take all of these things that I wanted and roll out a tool that let me do them, this is what I wanted. It's a unicorn with a lightsaber. It turns out those don't really exist. But, so I started out, and I started with this partial solution, right? The first step for me, and my team loved it when I told them this, I'm sure. If it's not documented, it didn't happen. That's one of the things that we I think, all accept as foundational, but it's really important to state that. So the first thing that we did was we just started writing down everything. Like everything goes in a ticket, everything gets documented, every step along the analytical road. And we're generally really good at documenting the work queue and the findings. Like this ticket came in, it was a false positive, or this ticket came in and we closed it. But the steps along that way, how we arrived at those conclusions, are what actually inform the intelligence and help us make better decisions next time. So that's the part that I had to get people in the habit of documenting. And our playbook, at T0 was literally, it was a single step. There was a box that said, do analysis here. And that's because all I wanted was to give us a place to put that information. We can iterate on it, figure out everything else after that, but if there's a place for this information to go, then there is the ability to mine it later. And that's the best I could do. Then, rolling this out, I think everybody, for me, I think for anybody else, if you're doing this, at this point, like, it really does make sense to start tracking your metrics. Figure out the things that you need to do to know where to enrich, where to focus your intelligence. So I started putting that in. Some of the fields there that I found were really useful. Maybe they'll benefit somebody else. It's like false positive, super important. From a tasking countermeasures perspective, I also looked at for every event what part of a successful kill chain was executed. So an event that had a command and control channel established is very different from an intelligence perspective. The amount that I need to learn from that to defend my environment, very different than it's like an email that was blocked as spam. I have to do very different things. I have to care about them very differently, and I have to mine them in very different ways. And I added some new indicator types. I could not get to the point where I could represent all of these compound things that I wanted to do, but some very basic indicator types went a long way for me. And I think that was my hardest part through this process, but was figuring out which of those really complex ideas had generalizable representations. So like a malware family is a perfect example of this. You talk to a reverser, they can give you pages, they can give you weeks on what makes a malware family a family, but they'll also give it a name. And now they won't all give it the same name, but they'll give it a name. And if you stick with one naming convention, you can use that name. We can use that name and tokenizations of that name to relate incidents with that malware family, regardless of hash, regardless of how it was delivered, regardless of anything else about it. And that becomes relevant to understand and map out all of the correlations there. Same thing with signatures and rules. That actually gave me a huge payoff also, because once I could tie each event to the particular signature that dropped it, that gives me a lot of insight into my false positives, gives me a lot of ability to use that graph to enrich and understand how to tune them. The link all the things part, that relationship, that graph, that didn't really happen. Because as I mentioned, and the reason I'm sitting here is because I did this with Demisto. So let's be honest, there are some things here that didn't work so well. The core work queue, great. That relationships part, I think we've got a long way to go. And what I hope is that as more people, as more customers, as more of the industry is trying to mine the data in these kinds of ways, we're trying to build the abstractions, we're trying to build the language, we're trying to leverage the patterns to make that usable. I'm hoping we'll get to the point where enough people care about that relationship, that graph, that we'll actually be able to do it a little better. So I ended up with like a plastic toy pony with a toothpick duct tape to its head. That's actually okay, because, and I'll give credit to Demisto for this slide. I just stole it from them. When I looked at, when I look at the universe of how we did this before with a whole bunch of different pieces of information in a whole bunch of different places and no way to correlate them, my kind of half-baked duct tape and baling wire ticket tracking with some amount of indicator correlation and ability to mine actually worked pretty well. And compared to this, there's a whole lot of value that comes from having that contextual data that we could collect. And what I realized and where we went after that is, do analysis here. It gave me this document. It gave me this history, this lifeblood of what my SOC has been doing, how we've been approaching our incidents, how we've been investigating them. And then each time, that was reference material. It made the incidents, it made the investigation go faster. It also, as I brought a couple new people onto my team, it gave them a lot of the previous institutional knowledge. When I want to investigate one thing, or when they needed to investigate something new, all they had to do was go back to the last time somebody else on the team did it, and they could come up to speed much faster. That also gave us the ability to turn and expand out those playbooks, because we had not just a conceptual view of how we wanted investigations to go, but a real view of how they actually worked when we were actually trying to solve the problems. So that became a really great iterative cycle, and I think more than anything else, the value that I got out of approaching it with this do analysis here block is this knowledge repository actually became useful to people, and trying to train up, trying to onboard new people, you either ramp them up through a lot of institutional knowledge, or you give them a playbook and they do what the book says to do, which is not necessarily what we actually want. So having the ability to give people this history gave me a huge multiplier on my team. So what I would say is, if you're thinking about doing this, start somewhere. For the CTI people and forensics people, for IR people, being able to bring that loop together so we can mine intelligence out of incident data is huge. For everybody else, just having this history is really, really valuable trying to bring new people on board. For people building security tools, if you happen to be a security orchestration and automation platform vendor, don't make me go to another tool to do this. I want to be able to bring all of this information together. I want to be able to bring my analysts up to speed, and I think that'll help us all move the mission forward and help our defenses go a lot faster.
Cool. Thank you, Adam. So there is a question kind of from the previous session, right, appropriate for you. And it's, how does Slack-like collaboration platform actually improve incident management? I think maybe what I would love to hear is, it's one thing to kind of collect all the knowledge in one place by collaboration and being able to chat in that platform. But what are your thoughts on kind of bringing that out, right? Which is, how do you make it more training oriented? How do analysts train rather than just being able to collaborate? Thoughts, more actionable insights.
So I think the first benefit is just having it, and having it available and searchable is still a whole lot better than having it on a whiteboard that gets erased when somebody doesn't notice that the corner of the whiteboard says "do not erase." Having it there, and then ultimately, I think it becomes a responsibility of the more senior people on the team to try and distill that back into polished knowledge. But the reality is that process is never going to be continuous. It's never going to be perfect, and it's never going to be as fast as a search function. So I think what we should do is we should accept that and build our tools, build our processes, so referring to historical context is just as much a part of the process as the process.
Very good. And I think I have a follow-up. And audience, if they have questions, you can raise hands, and we can go from that. Let's start there.
I couldn't tell if you were starting from like zero or you were building onto a team. So could you talk about maybe how long, like did you, 2 years ago, you something, 1 year ago? Give me a sense of how long it took to build.
Yeah, I was starting with nothing. I was the first incident responder on the team. Then we were a team of 5 by the time I left, all told. This journey, this adventure, I think all told was about 6 months. A lot of that comes from my history, my preconceived notions and baggage about what good knowledge management and good incident management looks like. But the amount of time that it took for us to get minimum viable product together for using this in our workflows and iterating on it and getting to the point where we had actually a lot of our processes automated because we had this reference, it went really fast once we had a place to start writing stuff down. For a couple months prior to this, I had none of that, and we had like text files shared across our desktops on our computers. We had a whiteboard that got erased overnight in the middle of an incident because somebody erased a whiteboard. So all of those things led up to it. But once we actually got a single instance documentation store, it went really quick from there.
Any other questions? Okay, so I had the follow-up question on the indexed information and shared information. That's actually, we see a lot of our customers leveraging the information from past incidents as they perform this particular incident. One of the areas where we are starting to invest is pulling this data and presenting to the analyst rather than analyst looking for the information. And to say the least, it's not an easy path technology-wise, right? But I think my question is towards your thoughts on, you stated that it's good enough for us to be able to start searching, first of all, but it's like, is your thought that being able to present slightly relevant information to the analyst when the analyst need it, is that a path worth following? What are your thoughts versus, hey, just let's build a fantastic data and let people search to start with?
That's something that I had been working on for several years, is trying to mine, trying to mine our historical data and present our best attempt at relevant connections. It didn't go well for me, to be honest. It doesn't mean it won't go well for you. You have, hopefully some more machine learning background than I do. But what I did see is every time we tried to do that, it took away the incentive and the part of the process where analysts tried it themselves. And so unless you can do it better than the analyst, I personally am really concerned that it will generate worse analysis. Doesn't mean you shouldn't try.
No, that's fantastic.
Just I might turn it off.
All right, guys. Any other questions? Otherwise, we'd like to thank Adam. Thanks for sharing critical insights on knowledge management.
Thanks.